I don't think Tardar's returning. I don't want him to. I think a character that knows of Tardar and has some connection to him would be interesting. Like I said, like, you know, Oct being sanitized, I feel like has to be addressed. I think it'd be really weird for there to put that character there and not at all acknowledge the fact that they are basically half dead because they wanted to be able to let go of their inhibitions to make music. Like, you don't just have a character trait like that and not talk about it at all. So, and you know, obviously, all the Octo Expansion characters are returning. Oct is sanitized. Like, I think that will have some relevance. I think Kamaboko or sanitization, like, they're gonna bring it up. Whether or not that's, like, the main villain is directly related to that, I don't know. That's the thing. People also always talk about Glenn Fiddler. I'm gonna be honest. There are very few community predictions I'm on board with. I do not think Glenn Fiddler is going to be inside order. Maybe you could argue, like, I know people are like, oh, it's weird that they bothered to 3D model this character just for one sunken scroll. And it's like, okay, but like they 3D modeled a squid for a sunken scroll. They made like a 3-dimensional parallax effect for every sunken scroll. Like, I just don't really feel like it's... People act like that's like dead confirmation. Like, I don't think it's that indicative that the character could be important. Also, we now have a different character in a lab coat, so I feel like Glenn Fiddler is basically entirely deconfirmed, but I don't know, that's my take. I just don't, I don't know. I don't see how that would work or be interesting. It's very unlikely that the story will in no way harken back to Octo Expansion in some forms. Like, there's going to be references, there's going to be hopefully explanations for, like, you know, more sanitization lore would be cool. Just more history of Kamaboko, baby, would be interesting. You know, because we have, like, Octo Valley and Octo Canyon. And those were set up to, like, basically be the same story. Like, you know, the lore, the scrolls are different, you know, it's more about Callie and Marie, but it's like, you know, the fact that Octo Canyon and Octo Valley both exist in Splatoon's world is kind of ridiculous. Like, there's literally just these two massive valleys that the Octarians occupied, and it's like, I think if they wanted to make the story similar enough to Octo Expansion that we're bringing back Tardar, we're bringing back sanitization, then the story would be taking place in the Deep Sea Metro again, or like, you know, at least somewhere underground under the ocean. And it's not. They're doing an entirely new thing with it. Visually and thematically, Splatoon stories are normally very, actually, like, pretty cohesive. So I think having the entire setting be different, but then have all the same characters doing all the same things, and it just wouldn't be telling a different story. Like, I just don't think if Tardar came back, he would just want the exact same thing, right? Like, what else would he do? And that would just be really lame if he just has the exact same plan. The bartender jellyfish on the second floor of the lobby, he was in on it the whole time. People are also like, oh, the copy machine is a robot with a red eye. That means it's side order. It's like, okay, but what does that mean? Like, that's not a theory. That's just two things that look vaguely similar, and like also doesn't even really hold any weight because it looks more like the, you know, rival Octolings with the red eye than anything in side order. So it's like, I don't know. There's just lots of random observations the community makes without actually tying it together into a theory, and it slightly annoys me because it's like, okay, but what are you actually saying about the story? Yeah, I mean, there doesn't have to be a villain character. It can be a character versus nature, right? We can just be fighting the simulation itself. But I think, I mean, the fact that it is a man-made or cephalopod-made thing, like, I mean, the simulation doesn't just happen, right? Like, someone has to be behind it. I don't know. I think there has to be something. I also just think Splatoon stories are a little, like, the lore goes deep, but the plot is, you know, there kind of normally has to be a villain, I feel like, in Splatoon. The stuff I really want to see from Splatoon is, like, very, you know, I loved, like, stuff like the chat logs, like, intimate, you know, conversations between characters where they reveal stuff about their past, where we learn stuff about the world, and where, you know, they can grow through their relationship and through the events of the story. I don't know if we're getting that in side order at all, but I want there to be a new villain because I want them to face a new threat that forces them to grow in some interesting way. We know that Pearl, Marina, and 8 don't like Tardar, but they do like Order, which is, well, besides Pearl, but, you know, I think the fact that the Squidbeak Splatoon and by extension Pearl and Marina are split on Chaos versus Order is really interesting. And that's, I mean, that's what makes 4 potentially super interesting, right? Is like, you know, Callie, Pearl, and Agent 4 were not on Team Order, even though they are the Squidbeak Splatoon who, you know, keeps order in the Inkling world. Like, that is their job, to keep order. But then at the same time, you know, 8 and Marina are on the same side as Tardar. They're both on order. Like, I genuinely think the Chaos versus Order thing is just, like, super interesting as, like, just, like, an alignment chart for the Splatoon characters, you know? Like, I feel like it tells us so much about them just by putting them there. Like, I think it's really interesting that they can be, like, diametrically opposed to other characters while still being, you know, and still holding a more similar philosophy to them on the world. Like, I genuinely think that is super cool. And why, you know, just in generally, like, Octo Expansion and Final Fest together, I think are just super interesting for those characters. Because, you know, Grizz was neutral. Grizz didn't care about the fate of the world one way or another because he just didn't like the world. Like, it, you know, there's different, like, types of nihilism. Like, Judd is just a neutral party because, you know, that's just his thing. He judges, you know, he's just an observer to the world, basically. He's just kind of this fly on the wall. And then Grizz was the world he wanted was already gone. So that's why he was neutral. Like, I just think it's so cool. I don't know. I love that. So the Final Fest poster is so interesting. But yeah, so now we are in a world of order. We're playing as a character who supported order, but our companion in Pearl Throne was on, you know, Team Chaos. Like, I don't know. Like, I want them to basically address that, basically. And Sheldon was neutral, yes. But what I'm saying is the characters are set up to have really interesting dynamics and interactions that genuinely, like, puts their view of the world into question. And if the story in any way touched on that and caused them to, like, see from the other perspective, I think that would be super neat. I think there's so much potential there. And that's why I don't want Tardar to come back, because Tardar is the most obvious person to run a world of order. Like, of course he would. That doesn't tell us anything about his character. That doesn't reveal anything. That doesn't tell us anything about the protagonist, because they already oppose Tardar. So the reason I really want a new villain is because there's so much room to explore who these characters could become were they to be put in these situations where they have to question what they think they know. And that is what I want. So that's super vague, because we know so little about the game, but I think this kind of speculation is so much more interesting to me than saying Glenn Fiddler has a bleached claw. Like, you know, I wish there was more of this type of conversation. I don't think there are hints in place to look for, really, outside of maybe, like, you know, the poster showing Agent 4 or whatever. I just don't think the devs have really created the mystery that a lot of the community thinks is there. I think we just don't know. And so I'm just saying what I hope we find out, because currently we don't know. Yeah, I mean, the Judd thing, I don't think that has relevance to side order. I hope it doesn't. I really hope it doesn't. We don't know the nature of the simulation at all. I mean, I don't know if they're literally just assimilated, like, into a computer, because, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. But Splatoon's story doesn't always make sense. I don't know. Like, there are places where I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, and there are places where I aren't. Like, for me, Grizz does not work, because we were told that this was our planet Earth, with, like, real humans, and real history, and, like, real world war, and now there is a talking bear. And, like, the talking sea creatures sound just as silly on the surface, but there is lore for them. They evolved, you know, now we know because of the crystals. Like, the Inklings and Octolings evolved to be like humans because they literally absorbed the crystals that were embedded with human will to see the surface and be free. Like, that's genuinely super cool, and it's like, it's sci-fi, it's not realistic, but it's an explanation. It's something that, you know, within the context of the game feels believable. Grizz being a bear that starts walking on 2 feet and conducting science and speaking out loud does not make sense and is not explained within the canon of the game, so I think it sucks. I don't like Grizz. Yeah, the Judds exist, but the Judds were never the antagonist. Like, I was able to throw the Judds aside because they never mattered. I guess that's why. I know that sounds, it ruins the argument, and that's always the one thing people can say. It's like, oh, but the Judds are there. But yeah, but the Judds are like a UI element. The Judds are a tutorial. The Judds are not the emotional crux of the plot, you know? Like, they're not... I don't know. I'm willing to overlook them because they didn't matter before. With Mr. Grizz, it's too in your face to not be explained. The Judds you know, even then, like, I could say the Judd's lore, and the Judd has lore. I don't know why Judd is telepathic. I don't know why Judd is immortal, but Judd was, you know, the professor who created Tardar owned Judd, so he was a brilliant scientist, and he froze him in a cryogenic sleep for 12,000 years. Like, we know that for a fact. There is some backstory. The Judds literally have, I always start going into Grizz stuff, but being conscious, if you are a bear, and you're cryogenically frozen. Like, you can't even make the argument that, like, his brain was, like, how does his brain grow without dying? He would run out of oxygen. Like, that's not how cryogenic sleep works. You can't be awake during cryogenic sleep because then you die. Like, then it's not sleep. It just doesn't work. And it's just such a, like, half-assed way of explaining it, too. Like, they just don't even, I don't know. If they committed one way or the other, that would be one thing. Like, if it's like, yeah, if it was weird talking sea creatures, okay, but then in Alterna, they went out of their way to explain the talking sea creatures. Like, that's the thing that I don't get, is like, they literally made this connection between the Inklings and humans that literally explains why their society is so similar to ours, when before it was just, like, video game logic. Like, they actually gave that lore, and then they made Grizz, who doesn't fit in the world. And it will always bother me, and I'm sorry I bring it up every single stream, but it will always bother me. I'd rather talk more about side order stuff like we were, but it always comes back to Grizz. But, yeah, I mean, obviously it's related, because it's Splatoon's story, and I don't want them to fumble that again. I want a villain that fits into the world. I mean, like, yes, it is a little silly and unrealistic, but supposedly there were other sea creatures in the waters of Alterna that evolved, and, like, yeah, it's unrealistic to think that as many sea creatures as we see being sentient humanoids in Splatoon, you know, all evolved from the same literal pool of water in Alterna. But I think, you know, it's supposed to reference, like, the Cambrian explosion of life, right? It's like, or even the human, you know, there's that one image in the Alterna logs where there's, like, the arrows coming from the crater. Like, it's, you know, it's the birthplace of life. It's a reference to how sentient life happened in real life with humans. So it's, obviously the diversity of sea creatures is unrealistic, but I think kind of, for me, that doesn't ruin it because it's just cool. Like, that's when it comes down to it. I don't mind if the lore is a little stupid as long as it's cool, and I just don't think Grizz is cool, and it's not explained, and it's just stupid. Well, salmonids aren't the same. Like, I don't know. I guess the salmonids are strangely sentient compared to, you know, the Inklings and Noctilings, but it's not. They didn't develop into a society with hands and feet and buildings and clothes. Well, they technically have, like, pants, but, you know, they don't resemble human society, really. Obviously, they have inspiration from, like, native peoples and, like, tribalistic culture, but they aren't, you know, modern human society the way the Inklings are. So, I think that's represented. It's maybe not perfectly scientifically, you know, logical, but it is, you know, acknowledged within the world of the game that they are a different society that came into being in a different way, and they act and live differently. So, for me, that's enough. Oh yeah, dude, I'm horrified of side order spoilers, especially because I got spoiled for Splatoon 3 story mode. Like, literally, like a really, really bad spoiler. Like, I literally saw an image of the final boss, like, a week before the game came out because it leaked to the internet. And I was so angry. And if that happens with side order, I don't know what I'll do. I'm literally just will not be able to use my YouTube feed for, like, that week. Like, I don't know, dude. I don't trust anything. I know they, apparently there's some kind of data mining protection. Like, there is side order data in the game right now, in the patch. But they, it's like encrypted or something. I don't know. Somehow the data miners can't get to it. I don't know what they did. I don't know why they don't always do that, but I'm very glad. I bought the DLC 11 months ago and have been waiting very patiently. I'm very ready. Please, Nintendo. I know we have a release date, but I just, please make time move faster.